Commander Sarah Chen had seen enough alien technology to know when something was designed to kill humans. The crystalline structures jutting from the abandoned ship's hull weren't just aesthetically pleasing curves. They pulsed with an energy that made her scanner scream. Warnings in 17 different languages. "Captain, I'm reading massive gravitational distortions around those formations," reported Lieutenant Torres from the bridge of the exploration vessel Defiance. "Whatever those things are, they're bending space-time like it's made of putty." Sarah floated outside the alien vessel in her EVA suit, magnetic boots keeping her anchored to her own ship's hull. The derelict craft was massive, easily 3 times the size of her heavy cruiser and covered in those beautiful deadly curves. Each one seemed to flow into the next like frozen liquid metal, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Any life signs?" she asked, though her gut already knew the answer. "Negative. Been dead in space for at least a century, maybe more." "But Captain—" Torres paused, his voice tight with concern. "Those energy readings aren't from any power source we recognize. It's like the ship itself is one giant weapon." Sarah had encountered 14 different alien species in her 20-year career with the Terran Exploration Force. Most had been peaceful, trading knowledge and resources with humanity. A few had been hostile, leading to brief but decisive conflicts that humanity had won through sheer stubborn determination and creative problem-solving. But this ship was different. This was technology that could reshape the fundamental forces of the universe. The curves weren't random, she realized as she studied them through her helmet's enhanced optics. They followed mathematical principles that her brain could almost grasp, like looking at a complex equation written in light and metal. Each curve represented a specific gravitational field manipulation, creating zones where gravity could be increased, decreased, or even reversed entirely. "Torres, what's our backup status?" "Admiral Morrison's fleet is 3 days out. He's bringing the Indomitable and her entire battle group. Orders are to secure the vessel and wait for the science teams." Sarah laughed, a sound that came out harsh through her suit's comm system. 3 days? If another species finds this thing first, they could use it to turn every human colony into a gravity well. We'd be paced before we knew what hit us. She activated her suit's recording system and began documenting the alien vessel's exterior. Every curve, every junction, every seemingly organic flow of the ship's design was cataloged and transmitted back to Earth. But documentation wasn't enough. Someone needed to get inside and understand how this technology worked. "Captain, I'm detecting movement inside the ship," Torres announced suddenly. "Not life signs, but something's activating. The energy patterns are shifting." Sarah felt her blood run cold. Dead ships didn't just wake up after a century of drifting, unless they weren't as dead as they appeared. The curves along the ship's hull began to glow brighter, cycling through colors that had no names in human language. The space around each formation shimmered like heat mirages, and Sarah's suit alarm started blaring as the gravitational fields intensified. "All stop," she ordered. "Reverse thrust, get us clear." But it was too late. The alien vessel had noticed them, and whatever ancient intelligence controlled it was very much awake. The curves weren't just weapon systems. They were sensory organs designed to detect and analyze any species that approached. And now they were focusing their attention on the small human ship that had dared to come too close. Sarah felt the irresistible pull as the gravity fields reached out and grabbed the Defiance. Her ship, all 8,000 tons of human engineering and determination, was being drawn toward those beautiful, deadly curves like iron filings to a magnet. "Emergency protocols," she shouted into her comm. "All hands prepare for hostile contact." The alien ship had been waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to approach its deadly beauty. The curves that lined its hull weren't just weapons or sensors. They were a test. A challenge issued to any species advanced enough to find it, and foolish enough to come close. As the Defiance was pulled inexorably toward the alien vessel, Sarah realized that her crew was about to become participants in an examination that had been waiting a century for the right test subjects. The question was whether humanity was smart enough, tough enough, or crazy enough to pass whatever trial the ancient aliens had designed. The curves pulsed brighter, and Sarah could swear she heard something like laughter echoing through the void. Not malicious laughter, but the sound of someone who had finally found a worthy opponent. The alien ship wasn't trying to kill them. It was trying to see what they were made of. "Torres, cancel that distress call to Admiral Morrison," Sarah said. surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "We're going to handle this ourselves. Captain? You heard me. This thing wants to see what humans can do. Let's show it." The Defiance shuddered as it was drawn into what Sarah could only describe as a docking bay that materialized from nothing. One moment they were being pulled toward solid hull, the next they were inside a vast chamber filled with the same flowing curves that covered the ship's exterior. The bay sealed itself behind them with technology that made their best force fields look like paper barriers. Artificial. Gravity is holding steady at 1 Earth. Standard, reported Chief Engineer Kowalski over the intercom. Atmosphere is, well, it's breathable, but I'm reading trace elements that don't exist on any periodic table we know about. Sarah assembled her boarding team with the efficiency born of years commanding exploration missions into unknown territory. Lieutenant Torres would stay with the ship, ready to execute emergency protocols if things went sideways. She selected Sergeant Martinez from the Marines, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw from Xenobiology, and Engineer Kowalski for the initial exploration team. "Remember, we're not here to fight," Sarah told her team as they suited up in the airlock. "The ship could have vaporized us the moment it detected us. Instead, it brought us inside. That suggests curiosity rather than hostility. Or it wants to study us before it kills us," Martinez muttered, checking his plasma rifle for the 3rd time. "Negative attitude noted and ignored, Sergeant," Sarah replied with a grin. "Dr. Shaw, what's your assessment of the atmospheric readings?" The xenobiologist consulted her tablet, her dark eyes bright with scientific excitement. "The trace elements are fascinating, Captain. They appear to be synthetic isotopes designed to enhance neural activity. Whoever built this ship wanted visitors to think more clearly, not less." The airlock cycled, and they stepped into an environment that challenged every assumption about alien design philosophy. The corridors weren't corridors at all, but flowing pathways that curved and twisted in 3 dimensions. Gravity seemed to shift subtly as they moved, always keeping them oriented toward what felt like down, even when they were clearly walking on what had been a wall moments before. "The curves aren't just decorative," Kowalski observed, running his scanner over the nearest formation. "They're functional components of the ship's infrastructure. Power conduits, data pathways, structural supports, everything is integrated into these flowing designs." Dr. Shaw was documenting everything with the intensity of someone who knew she was witnessing technology, centuries ahead of human achievement. "Captain, these formations are alive," she announced suddenly. "Not biological, but responsive to our presence. They're analyzing us on a molecular level." As if responding to her words, the curves around them began to pulse with softer light, cycling through patterns that seemed almost welcoming. The corridor ahead opened into a vast chamber dominated by a single massive curve that rose from floor to ceiling in a spiral that made Sarah's eyes water to follow. "It's beautiful," she whispered, then immediately felt foolish for the admission. "And dangerous," Martinez added, though his voice lacked its usual edge. "I'm reading energy levels that could power New Tokyo for a decade." The central spiral pulsed once, and suddenly the chamber filled with holographic displays showing star charts, technical schematics, and what looked like historical records. The information was overwhelming, but Sarah's enhanced neural implants began parsing the data streams automatically. "They're showing us their history," she realized. "This ship belonged to a species called the Architects. They've been traveling the galaxy for millions of years, seeding worlds with challenges designed to test developing civilizations." Dr. Shaw moved closer to one of the displays, her scientific training overriding her survival instincts. "Captain, according to this, humanity is the first species to board this particular test vessel in over 50,000 years. Most species either attack it from a distance or flee entirely." "What happened to the ones who didn't flee or attack?" Martinez asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be pleasant. Sarah studied the flowing text and images that her implants were translating. "They failed the tests. The ship would release them unharmed, but they were marked as unworthy of advancement. Their species would be quarantined from Architect technology indefinitely. And the ones who passed?" Kowalski wanted to know. The display shifted, showing star maps dotted with civilizations that had transcended their original limitations. Species that had mastered faster than light travel, energy manipulation, and even dimensional engineering. The Architects had been guiding galactic development for eons, but only for those brave enough and clever enough to approach their test vessels. We're being evaluated, Sarah said, the full weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. This entire ship is one massive examination. Every curve, every energy field, every response we make is being analyzed and graded. The central spiral pulsed again, and new displays appeared, showing complex puzzles that seemed to blend physics, philosophy, and pure intuition. The challenges weren't designed to test human knowledge, but human character. How would they respond to problems that had no obvious solutions? How would they work together when faced with the impossible? Captain, Dr. Shaw said quietly, I think we've just been enrolled in the most important test in human history. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of her species' future settling on her shoulders. The architects hadn't randomly chosen her ship. They'd been monitoring human expansion into space for decades, waiting for the right moment to issue their challenge. The question was whether humanity was ready to join the ranks of truly advanced civilizations, or if they would be found wanting and left to develop in isolation. All right, people, she said, squaring her shoulders. Let's show these architects what humans are made of. The three pathways stretched before them like cosmic arteries, each one pulsing with different energy signatures that seemed to resonate with different aspects of human nature. The leftmost path glowed with cool blue light and emanated an aura of pure logic and scientific precision. The center path shimmered with warm golden energy that spoke to creativity and artistic vision. The rightmost path pulsed with deep red light that carried the weight of moral philosophy and ethical decision-making. We have to choose, Dr. Shaw said, her voice hushed with the gravity of the moment. But choose what? Which path represents the correct answer for humanity? Sarah studied each pathway, her enhanced neural implants analyzing the energy patterns while her instincts as an explorer and leader weighed the implications. The architect cube in her hand had grown warm, its surface pattern shifting to mirror her thought processes. Maybe that's the wrong question, she said slowly. The architects have been testing our ability to appreciate beauty, to collaborate, to find elegant solutions. What if this isn't about choosing the right path, but about understanding why someone would choose each one? Martinez stepped closer to the red pathway, his expression thoughtful. This one feels like duty, honor, the weight of making decisions that affect billions of lives. It's asking whether we can handle the moral responsibility that comes with advanced technology. Kowalski was drawn to the blue path, his engineer's mind responding to its promise of pure knowledge. Perfect understanding of the universe's fundamental laws. The ability to solve any technical problem, overcome any physical limitation. It's offering us the keys to reality itself. Dr. Shaw stood before the golden path, her scientist's curiosity balanced by an artist's appreciation for beauty. Creation. The power to reshape matter and energy into forms of incredible beauty, not just to understand the universe, but to improve it, to make it more than it was. Sarah felt the cube pulse in her hand as she began to understand the true nature of the test. They're not asking us to choose which path humanity should take. They're asking us to prove we understand that all three paths are necessary. Logic without creativity becomes sterile. Creativity without ethics becomes dangerous. Ethics without knowledge becomes powerless. She stepped forward, not toward any single path, but toward the junction where all three began. The cube in her hand blazed with brilliant white light as she pressed it against the smooth surface where the pathways converged. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The chamber dissolved around them, replaced by a vast space filled with flowing curves that contained entire star systems within their graceful arcs. They stood on a platform that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge and wisdom of 1,000,000 civilizations. Welcome, a voice said, though it came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking directly to their minds rather than their ears. You have passed the first test by understanding that advancement requires balance. Many species choose the path that reflects their greatest strength and ignore the others. You have chosen integration. The voice belonged to something that had once been biological but had transcended those limitations eons ago. The being that appeared before them was a flowing sculpture of light and energy, its form shifting to reflect different aspects of its vast consciousness. It was beautiful, terrible, and utterly alien, yet somehow familiar. We are the architects, the being continued. We seed the galaxy with challenges because stagnation is the greatest enemy of conscious life. Every species that reaches a certain level of development faces the same choice: remain safely limited, or risk transformation into something greater. Sarah found her voice. Though speaking to a being of such immense power and knowledge felt like trying to have a conversation with a star, what happened to the species that chose only one path? The space around them filled with images of civilizations that had made different choices. Purely logical species that had solved every technical problem but had lost all creativity and joy, becoming perfect machines trapped in sterile perfection. Purely artistic species that had created works of incredible beauty, but had lost the ability to make practical decisions, ultimately destroying themselves through well-intentioned but catastrophic choices. Purely ethical species that had achieved moral perfection, but lacked the knowledge or creativity to implement their ideals, becoming paralyzed by their own righteousness. Each path alone leads to a form of death, the architect explained. Logic without heart becomes tyranny. Art without wisdom becomes chaos. Ethics without power becomes irrelevance. Only by embracing all three can a species achieve true advancement. Dr. Shaw stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her awe. What does true advancement mean? What do we become if we pass your tests? The architect's form shifted, showing them glimpses of what humanity could become. Beings of incredible power and knowledge, capable of reshaping matter with thought, traveling between dimensions as easily as walking between rooms, and creating works of art that spanned entire galaxies. But more than power, they would gain perspective, the ability to see the universe not as a collection of resources to exploit, but as a canvas for conscious minds to improve and beautify. You become gardeners of reality, the architect said, guardians of the cosmic garden, helping younger species find their own paths to advancement while protecting them from the dangers that threaten all conscious life. Martinez, ever practical, asked the question that was weighing on all their minds. What's the catch? What do we have to give up? The architect's form grew more solid, more present, as if the question had drawn it closer to their reality. You must give up the illusion of safety. Advanced species face threats that would destroy entire star systems. You must give up the comfort of ignorance. You will see the universe as it truly is, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. And you must give up the luxury of thinking only of yourselves. Every decision you make will affect billions of lives across thousands of worlds. Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders, but instead of crushing her, it felt strangely liberating. Humanity had always been at its best when facing impossible challenges, when forced to grow beyond their limitations. We accept, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. But we do it as humans, keeping what makes us who we are while becoming something more. The architect pulsed with what might have been approval. Then prepare for the final test. You have proven you understand the principles. Now you must prove you can apply them when everything you care about is at stake. The space around them shifted and suddenly they were standing on the bridge of the Defiance. But it was wrong in subtle ways that made Sarah's skin crawl. The walls curved too much, the gravity felt unstable, and through the viewports she could see Earth burning. Simulation, Dr. Shaw said immediately, but her voice shook despite her rational assessment. It has to be a simulation, does it matter? The architect's voice asked, coming from the ship's communication system. If the experience is indistinguishable from reality, if the emotions and choices are real, what difference does it make whether the threat is actual or simulated? The main display showed a fleet of vessels approaching Earth, their design incorporating the same flowing curves as the architect's ship, but twisted into something aggressive and predatory. These weren't architects, they were something else. Something that had taken architect technology and corrupted it for purposes of conquest and destruction, the Devourers, the architect explained as the team watched in horror, as the enemy fleet began systematically dismantling Luna's orbital shipyards, a species that passed our tests millennia ago, but chose to interpret advancement as dominance. They consume worlds, absorbing their resources and enslaving their populations to fuel endless expansion. Sarah's command instincts kicked in, simulation or not. Options. What can we do to stop them? Lieutenant Torres materialized at his station, though his movements had the slightly artificial quality of a simulation character. Admiral Morrison's fleet is still 2 days out. We have 18 ships in the system, most of them civilian transports and mining vessels. The Devourers have over 200 combat vessels. The tactical situation was hopeless by any conventional measure, but Sarah had learned that conventional thinking was exactly what the architects were testing them to move beyond. She studied the enemy fleet's formation, noting how their curved hull designs created specific gravitational distortions. They're using the same principles we learned in the test chambers, she realized. Their entire fleet is one massive gravitational manipulation system. They're not just attacking Earth, they're preparing to harvest the planet's mass for raw materials. Kowalski was working frantically at his station, his engineer's mind racing to understand the technology they'd been exposed to. Captain, if we can interface the Architect Cube with our ship's systems, we might be able to disrupt their gravitational fields. But the power requirements would burn out every system we have. Do it, Sarah ordered without hesitation. Captain, Martinez interrupted, even if we disrupt their attack, we'll be defenseless. They'll destroy us immediately afterward. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, understanding that this was the true test, not just solving technical problems or appreciating beauty, but making the choice to sacrifice everything for something greater than themselves. But that wasn't enough. There had to be a way to save Earth and survive to continue fighting. Dr. Shaw, the biological patterns we observed in the Architect technology, could they be adapted to create a regenerative system? Something that could repair damage as quickly as it occurred? Shaw's eyes lit up with understanding. A biological approach to technological problems. Instead of burning out our systems, we make them adaptive, self-repairing. Like immune systems for our technology. Martinez, if we succeed in disrupting their formation, where would you hit them to cause maximum confusion? The sergeant studied the tactical display with professional attention. Their command ships are using overlapping gravitational fields for protection. But if we create enough chaos in their formation, they'll have to choose between maintaining defensive positions and regrouping for attack. That's when they're vulnerable. Sarah felt all the pieces clicking together. Logic, creativity, and ethics combining into something greater than the sum of its parts. We're not just going to disrupt their attack. We're going to turn their own technology against them. But we're going to do it in a way that gives them a chance to surrender rather than simply destroying them. The plan that emerged was audacious even by human standards. Using the Architect Cube as an interface, they would sync the Defiance with Earth's magnetic field, turning the entire planet into a massive gravitational wave generator. The pulse would disrupt the Devourer fleet's formation and temporarily disable their weapons, but it would also broadcast a message, a demonstration of advanced Architect principles used not for conquest, but for protection. It's not just about stopping them, Sarah explained as her team prepared for the desperate gambit. It's about showing them there's another way to use this technology. We're offering them a choice between destruction and redemption. The execution required perfect coordination between all 4 team members. Kowalski interfaced the cube with the ship's systems while Shaw guided the biological adaptation protocols that would keep their technology from burning out. Martinez coordinated targeting data, while Sarah balanced the massive energies involved. When they activated the system, the Defiance became something new, part human technology, part Architect science, and part biological organism. The ship's hull began to flow and curve like living tissue, channeling gravitational forces that should have torn it apart. The pulse that erupted from Earth was visible across the solar system, a wave of twisted spacetime that washed over the Devourer fleet like a cosmic tsunami. Their formations scattered, their weapons powered down, and for a moment, the attack on Earth came to a complete halt. But more importantly, the pulse carried information, a complete download of everything the team had learned about the true purpose of Architect technology. For the first time in centuries, the Devourers were forced to confront the question of whether advancement meant domination or stewardship. Some of them are powering down completely, Torres reported, his voice filled with amazement. 30 ships just dropped out of formation and are broadcasting surrender signals. Others in the fleet were less willing to reconsider their choices. The remaining vessels began regrouping for a second attack, but their numbers were greatly reduced and their formation was chaotic. Admiral Morrison's fleet just dropped out of hyperspace, Martinez announced. They're broadcasting demands for immediate surrender. But Sarah wasn't watching the tactical display anymore. She was focused on the Architect, whose form had become more solid and present than ever before. You have passed, the being said simply. You found a solution that honored all 3 paths while remaining true to your human nature. You chose to protect rather than conquer, to redeem rather than destroy, and to risk everything for principles greater than your own survival. The simulation began to fade, But the knowledge they had gained remained. The defiance was still real. The architect cube still pulsed in Sarah's hand, and somewhere in space, the real Devourer fleet was still approaching Earth, but now humanity had the tools to face them as equals rather than victims. The space around them shifted, and suddenly they were standing on the bridge of the Defiance. But it was wrong in subtle ways that made Sarah's skin crawl. The walls curved too much, the gravity felt unstable, and through the viewports she could see Earth burning. Simulation, Dr. Shaw said immediately, but her voice shook despite her rational assessment. It has to be a simulation, does it matter? The architect's voice asked, coming from the ship's communication system. If the experience is indistinguishable from reality, if the emotions and choices are real, what difference does it make whether the threat is actual or simulated? The main display showed a fleet of vessels approaching Earth, their design incorporating the same flowing curves as the architect's ship, but twisted into something aggressive and predatory. These weren't architects, they were something else. Something that had taken architect technology and corrupted it for purposes of conquest and destruction, the Devourers, the architect explained as the team watched in horror, as the enemy fleet began systematically dismantling Luna's orbital shipyards, a species that passed our tests millennia ago, but chose to interpret advancement as dominance. They consume worlds, absorbing their resources and enslaving their populations to fuel endless expansion. Sarah's command instincts kicked in, simulation or not. Options. What can we do to stop them? Lieutenant Torres materialized at his station, though his movements had the slightly artificial quality of a simulation character. Admiral Morrison's fleet is still 2 days out. We have 18 ships in the system, most of them civilian transports and mining vessels. The Devourers have over 200 combat vessels. The tactical situation was hopeless by any conventional measure. But Sarah had learned that conventional thinking was exactly what the architects were testing them to move beyond. She studied the enemy fleet's formation, noting how their curved hull designs created specific gravitational distortions. They're using the same principles we learned in the test chambers, she realized. Their entire fleet is one massive gravitational manipulation system. They're not just attacking Earth, they're preparing to harvest the planet's mass for raw materials. Kowalski was working frantically at his station, his engineer's mind racing to understand the technology they'd been exposed to. Captain, if we can interface the architect cube with our ship's systems, we might be able to disrupt their gravitational fields. But the power requirements would burn out every system we have. Do it, Sarah ordered without hesitation. Captain, Martinez interrupted, even if we disrupt their attack, we'll be defenseless. They'll destroy us immediately afterward. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, understanding that this was the true test, not just solving technical problems or appreciating beauty, but making the choice to sacrifice everything for something greater than themselves. But that wasn't enough. There had to be a way to save Earth and survive to continue fighting. Dr. Shaw, the biological patterns we observed in the architect technology, could they be adapted to create a regenerative system? Something that could repair damage as quickly as it occurred? Shaw's eyes lit up with understanding. A biological approach to technological problems. Instead of burning out our systems, we make them adaptive, self-repairing. Like immune systems for our technology. Martinez, if we succeed in disrupting their formation, where would you hit them to cause maximum confusion? The sergeant studied the tactical display with professional attention. Their command ships are using overlapping gravitational fields for protection. But if we create enough chaos in their formation, they'll have to choose between maintaining defensive positions and regrouping for attack. That's when they're vulnerable. Sarah felt all the pieces clicking together. Logic, creativity, and ethics combining into something greater than the sum of its parts. We're not just going to disrupt their attack. We're going to turn their own technology against them. But we're going to do it in a way that gives them a chance to surrender rather than simply destroying them. The plan that emerged was audacious even by human standards. Using the architect cube as an interface, they would sync the Defiance with Earth's magnetic field, turning the entire planet into a massive gravitational wave generator. The pulse would disrupt the Devourer fleet's formation and temporarily disable their weapons, but it would also broadcast a message, a demonstration of advanced architect principles used not for conquest, but for protection. It's not just about stopping them, Sarah explained as her team prepared for the desperate gambit. It's about showing them there's another way to use this technology. We're offering them a choice between destruction and redemption. The execution required perfect coordination between all 4 team members. Kowalski interfaced the cube with the ship's systems while Shaw guided the biological adaptation protocols that would keep their technology from burning out. Martinez coordinated targeting data, while Sarah balanced the massive energies involved. When they activated the system, the Defiance became something new, part human technology, part architect science, and part biological organism. The ship's hull began to flow and curve like living tissue, channeling gravitational forces that should have torn it apart. The pulse that erupted from Earth was visible across the solar system, a wave of twisted spacetime that washed over the Devourer fleet like a cosmic tsunami. Their formations scattered, their weapons powered down, and for a moment, the attack on Earth came to a complete halt. But more importantly, the pulse carried information, a complete download of everything the team had learned about the true purpose of architect technology. For the first time in centuries, the Devourers were forced to confront the question of whether advancement meant domination or stewardship. Some of them are powering down completely, Torres reported, his voice filled with amazement. 30 ships just dropped out of formation and are broadcasting surrender signals. Others in the fleet were less willing to reconsider their choices. The remaining vessels began regrouping for a second attack, but their numbers were greatly reduced and their formation was chaotic. Admiral Morrison's fleet just dropped out of hyperspace, Martinez announced. They're broadcasting demands for immediate surrender. But Sarah wasn't watching the tactical display anymore. She was focused on the architect, whose form had become more solid and present than ever before. You have passed, the being said simply. You found a solution that honored all 3 paths while remaining true to your human nature. You chose to protect rather than conquer, to redeem rather than destroy, and to risk everything for principles greater than your own survival. The simulation began to fade, but the knowledge they had gained remained. The Defiance was still real. The architect cube still pulsed in Sarah's hand, and somewhere in space, the real Devourer fleet was still approaching Earth, but now humanity had the tools to face them as equals rather than victims. The transition from simulation to reality was jarring, like waking from a vivid dream only to find that the dream had been more real than the waking world. Sarah found herself back in the architect vessel's central chamber, but everything had changed. The curves that lined the walls were no longer alien and incomprehensible. They were tools, interfaces, extensions of conscious will that responded to thought and intention. Captain, Torres's voice crackled through her comm system. We're receiving multiple hyperspace signatures, big ones. Admiral Morrison's fleet just arrived, but there's something else. Something much larger coming from the opposite direction. Through the chamber's curved walls, which had become transparent at Sarah's unconscious desire to see outside, she watched as space itself began to twist and fold. The approaching Devourer fleet wasn't using conventional faster-than-light travel. They were bending reality around themselves, treating the universe like clay to be molded according to their will. How long before they arrive? Sarah asked, her hand still gripping the architect cube that had become warm and responsive to her thoughts. 18 hours, maybe less, Torres replied. Captain, these readings are off any scale we have. Each of their ships is the size of a small moon, and they're generating enough energy to power our entire civilization for centuries. Dr. Shaw was studying the readings streaming through her enhanced perception, her scientific mind processing information at speeds that would have been impossible before their transformation. They're not just coming to attack Earth. They're coming to harvest our entire solar system. Every planet, every asteroid, every particle of matter will be converted into raw materials for their expansion. The architect materialized beside them, its form more solid and defined than before, as if their success in the simulation had made it more real. The Devourers represent the greatest failure in our history of guiding species toward advancement. They learned to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality, but they never learned wisdom or restraint. They consume entire civilizations not out of malice, but because they cannot conceive of any other way to exist. Sarah felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on her shoulders. 18 hours to save not just Earth but every living thing in the solar system, using technology she barely understood against an enemy that had been perfecting their destructive arts for millennia. What are our real capabilities? she asked the architect. Not the simulation. What can we actually do with the knowledge you've given us? That depends entirely on how well you've integrated the three paths, the architect replied. Knowledge without creativity is sterile. Creativity without ethics is chaos. Ethics without knowledge is powerless. But when all three are balanced and working in harmony, conscious beings can reshape reality itself. Kowalski was interfacing with the ship's systems through methods that hadn't existed an hour ago, his consciousness extending through the architect technology, like neural pathways through a vast brain. Captain, the Defiance isn't just a ship anymore. The integration process has fundamentally altered our technology. We're part biological, part mechanical, and part something else entirely. We can interface directly with spacetime itself. The question, Martinez said pragmatically, is whether we can do it well enough to stop an enemy that's had thousands of years to perfect the same abilities. Sarah closed her eyes and felt her consciousness expand through the architect vessel, sensing the vast networks of curved technology that extended throughout the ship like a nervous system. But more than that, she could feel Earth itself. 4.5 billion years of accumulated life and consciousness, all of it precious beyond measure. We're not going to fight them, she said suddenly, the solution coming to her with crystalline clarity. We're going to teach them, Captain. Torres's voice carried a note of confusion that Sarah could hear even through the comm system. The simulation wasn't just a test for us, it was a learning experience. We figured out how to use architect technology, not just for destruction or defense, but for communication, for showing other beings a different way of thinking. The Devourers became what they are because they only learned the destructive applications of this technology. They never learned that consciousness itself is the most powerful force in the universe. Dr. Shaw understood immediately. We're going to create a reality field that encompasses the entire solar system. Not to attack them, but to show them what they're about to destroy. Make them experience what it means to be part of a living, growing, conscious ecosystem instead of just consuming it. The technical requirements will be staggering, Kowalski warned. We'll need to coordinate not just our ship, but every piece of architect technology in the system. Plus, we'll need to interface with Earth's biosphere, the collective consciousness of every living thing on the planet. And if we fail, Martinez added grimly, we'll have given them detailed intelligence about our capabilities right before they wipe us out. Sarah felt the architect cube pulse in her hand, its energy patterns synchronizing with her heartbeat. That's the point. We're going to trust them to make the right choice when they see what the universe could be, instead of just what it can provide. It's the ultimate expression of the three paths, using our knowledge and creativity to make an ethical choice that puts the future of consciousness itself above our own survival. The architects' form began to glow brighter, and Sarah realized that their decision had fundamentally altered their relationship with the ancient being. They were no longer students being tested. They were partners in a cosmic endeavor that spanned millions of years and countless civilizations. You understand? The architect said, and for the first time, its voice carried something that might have been relief. This is why we test. Not to find species worthy of our technology, but to find minds capable of taking that technology in directions we never imagined. You are about to attempt something that we, in all our eons of existence, never considered possible. Through the ship's enhanced sensors, Sarah could feel Admiral Morrison's fleet taking defensive positions around Earth. Brave men and women preparing to die fighting an enemy they couldn't possibly defeat with conventional weapons. But they wouldn't have to die, because humanity was about to prove that consciousness, creativity, and cooperation could accomplish what mere force never could. All right, people, Sarah said, her voice carrying across multiple dimensions as the architect technology amplified her words. Let's show the universe what humans can do when we stop thinking like conquerors and start thinking like gardeners. The transformation of the solar system began at the quantum level and expanded outward like ripples in a cosmic pond. Sarah felt her consciousness merge with the architect cube, then extend through every piece of technology humanity had ever built, every living organism on Earth, and finally into the fundamental structure of space-time itself. Through her expanded awareness, she sensed Dr. Shaw interfacing with Earth's biosphere, her consciousness touching every bacteria, every plant, every animal, and every human being on the planet. The xenobiologist was weaving their life patterns into a single, coherent symphony of existence that resonated across multiple dimensions. Kowalski had become one with the solar system's technological infrastructure, from the smallest communication satellite to the massive orbital shipyards around Mars. His engineer's mind was restructuring matter and energy at the molecular level, turning cold metal and circuits into extensions of living consciousness. Martinez was coordinating with Admiral Morrison's fleet and every human military installation in the system, not as weapons of war but as nodes in a vast communication network that would broadcast humanity's message to the approaching devourers. "Integration complete," Sarah announced, though the words were transmitted through gravitational waves rather than sound. "Beginning reality field generation." The effect was visible across the entire solar system, as curved formations of pure energy began materializing in the space between planets. These weren't weapons or shields, but expressions of conscious intention made manifest in the physical universe. Each curve represented a different aspect of what the solar system could become, not just a source of raw materials, but a garden where consciousness could grow and flourish in forms that had never existed before. Through sensors that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, Sarah watched the Devourer fleet emerge from hyperspace. Their ships were exactly as massive and terrifying as the readings had suggested, but now she could see them clearly for what they truly were, beings so traumatized by eons of struggle for survival that they had forgotten any purpose beyond consumption. "They're scanning the reality field," Torres reported from the Defiance, his consciousness now extended through communication networks that spanned light years. "Energy readings are, Captain, they're confused. Their sensors are telling them that the solar system contains more organized information than their entire empire." "Because it does," Sarah replied, feeling the vast weight of human history, art, literature, science, and dreams flowing through the reality field like blood through cosmic arteries. "We're not just showing them what we are, we're showing them what they could become." The first contact between the reality field and the Devourer fleet was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Instead of weapons fire or demands for surrender, the field simply embraced the massive ships, surrounding them with patterns of energy that communicated directly with their consciousness rather than their technology. For the first time in millennia, the Devourers experienced what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves. The reality field showed them human children learning to read, artists creating beauty from nothing, scientists discovering new truths about the universe, and ordinary people making extraordinary sacrifices for the good of others. But more than that, it showed them how all of these individual acts of consciousness contributed to something greater, a collective awakening that increased the universe's capacity for awareness, creativity, and growth. "Several ships are powering down," Martinez reported, his voice filled with wonder. "They're not surrendering. They're asking for permission to join the field." But not all of the Devourers were ready to abandon eons of conditioning. The largest ships in their fleet began charging weapons that could crack planets, their commanders choosing destruction over the vulnerability required for transformation. "They're going to fire on Earth," Dr. Shaw warned. Her consciousness still merged with the planet's biosphere. "They'd rather destroy us than risk changing what they've become." Sarah felt a moment of profound sadness for being so damaged by their own choices that they couldn't accept the possibility of redemption. But sadness wasn't enough. The reality field needed to respond to the threat while maintaining its essential nature as an expression of growth rather than destruction. "We don't fight them," she decided. "We heal them." The curves of energy that filled the solar system began to pulse in patterns that resonated with the deepest levels of consciousness. Instead of deflecting or destroying the Devourer weapons, the reality field absorbed them, transforming the destructive energy into something entirely new, a healing force that reached into the traumatized cores of the Devourer minds and offered them something they had forgotten was possible: hope. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Weapons that had been designed to eliminate entire species instead became conduits for empathy, forcing the Devourers to experience what their victims had felt, but also showing them that those same victims could choose forgiveness over revenge. "The entire fleet is standing down," Torres announced, his voice barely audible over the cosmic harmonies that now filled the communication channels. "Captain, they're not just surrendering, they're crying. A species that hasn't experienced emotion for 10,000 years is remembering what it means to feel." Through the reality field, Sarah could sense the profound transformation taking place throughout the Devourer fleet. Beings who had been consumed by endless hunger for resources were rediscovering that consciousness itself was the only resource that mattered, because it was the only resource that grew stronger when shared rather than consumed. The architect materialized within the field, its form now spanning multiple star systems, as it observed what humanity had accomplished. In all our eons of testing and guiding, it said, its voice filled with something approaching awe. We have never seen a species transform their greatest enemies into their greatest allies through pure expression of conscious intention. What happens now? Sarah asked, feeling the reality field beginning to stabilize into permanent patterns that would link the solar system to communication networks spanning the galaxy. Now you teach, the architect replied. The Devourers will return to their empire carrying the patterns they have learned here. Some will resist the transformation, but others will embrace it. The change will spread, civilization by civilization, until the entire galaxy understands that consciousness is not something to be hoarded or consumed, but something to be cultivated and shared. Dr. Shaw's consciousness touched Sarah's through the field, carrying with it the excitement of discovery. Captain, the biological patterns in the reality field are self-replicating. Every system that experiences this transformation will become capable of creating its own reality fields, spreading the pattern throughout the galaxy like seeds of consciousness. And humanity? Kowalski asked. What do we become? Sarah felt the answer flowing through the curves of energy that now linked every human mind to the vast network of conscious beings scattered across the stars. We become gardeners, she said simply, tending the garden of reality, helping consciousness grow in forms we can't even imagine yet. Through the reality field, she could sense other species throughout the galaxy becoming aware of what had happened in the Sol system. Some were afraid, some were curious, and some were filled with hope for the first time in eons. The transformation was beginning, and it would continue for as long as conscious beings chose growth over stagnation, cooperation over competition, and beauty over mere survival. The curves that had once seemed alien and threatening now felt like home, flowing, expressions of conscious intention that connected, every thinking being in an ever-expanding garden of awareness. Humanity had not just passed the architect test, they had transcended it, creating something entirely new that would reshape the galaxy for eons to come. And in the end, that was the most human thing they could have done, taking someone else's test and turning it into something completely unexpected, something that honored the past while creating possibilities for the future that no one had dared to imagine. The garden of reality stretched out before them, infinite in scope and breathtaking in its beauty, waiting for conscious minds to fill it with wonders that existed nowhere else in the universe. The real adventure was just beginning.